Maze Craze, you have four main goals. So the first is to design and build a maze traveler that will navigate a randomly selected maze. Part two, create a prop that will transform within the maze. Number three, remove an object. And then number four, create and present a story about the maze traveler's journey. So those are really the four things you have to do in order to solve this challenge. It sounds nice and simple with these four, and as we will see, it gets a little more complex, but just bear with us. It's going to be okay.
So first off, we've got the maze. So the maze is going to be a 16-foot by 16-foot grid. It's going to be laid out in the performance area. So that's really big. Like when we were like planning this presentation, we had discussed like bringing in like a mocked up size of this thing, and we decided we couldn't fit that in the room. So
we'll show you what we did come up with, just because I think it's helpful for sizing purposes. So this is the maze that we create and that we bring to our trainings, and this is a 1 inch to 1 foot size. So as you can see, I mean, like it's pretty large. Just to give you an idea.
Yeah. And so the squares are each going to be 4 feet by 4 feet, and you're only guaranteed 20 feet by 20 feet in the presentation, in the rules of the road. So your teams are going to have to be very space conscientious during their presentation, and decide how they want to set everything up beforehand so that they can come there and like have it ready based on this restriction.
So if you look on the back page of your challenge, it's not the back page, it's page 9 of the challenge. It has the different mazes laid out for you so you can see what the different options are. So if you're an elementary level team, you're only going to use these top 4. If you are a middle level or senior level team, you're going to use numbers 1 through 8 down here. And then as you go on to higher levels, whether you make it to state or globals, that's when we add in these other 2 rows. So you can ignore the rows. You can ignore the bottom 2 rows for just the regional tournament.
Mm-hmm. So just a logistics thing. When at the tournament, when we set up the maze, we're going to have some appraisers setting down the maze, and at the same time they're setting down the maze, we're going to give your teams a copy of the maze that we are setting up. That way they can check and make sure that we've set it up correctly. So we'll go down, we'll set the X's down, we'll set the arrows down and the walls down, and they'll have to confirm with us before the presentation starts that we have set it down correctly. So it'll be like they'll have to like sign something or something like that.
So basically we're going to show, so this is what a card would look like at the tournament. So they'll come to the tournament, they'll pick a random card out.
It'll stay in an envelope sealed until they get to time to set it up.
And then when they get to the launch zone, so they'll go behind the launch line and their 2 minutes will start. We'll hand them a card that looks similar to this depending on the level that they're at, elementary, middle, or senior. And while the appraisers are setting up the maze, your team will have the opportunity to study the card in front of them and set up whatever kinds of things they need to set up before they get going. Mm-hmm. So this could be, you know, if they're programming a robot to a certain thing, they could do that. It really just depends. And then
if they need a plan, anything like that. So they can't actually set their props up in the area, but they can do any planning that needs to be done for them.
And then right before they go on, the 2 minutes will end. We'll say stop, that's 2 minutes. And then the appraisers will ask the team to confirm that we've set the maze up correctly. Not because we intend to set the maze up incorrectly, but because sometimes it happens and we don't want to ruin you know, children that have put in a bunch of work and hours on this because we accidentally set a wall up somewhere wrong or something like that.
Just to reiterate, we will never purposely set the thing up incorrectly. We've had that question. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the teams will go ahead and get started. So I just wanted to show you what these cards look like. Again, the little teeny tiny versions are on page 9 of your challenge. Okay.
We'll wait for the slide to...
Yeah, my computer is dragging. Okay, so the next piece we want to talk about is the Maze Traveler. And this is section C of your challenge if you're following along on your own. And just some of the important things that we picked out. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So The two big components that your Maze Travelers scored up for are technical innovation and technical design. So if some of you have been to the standard team manager training, technical innovation is an analog for creativity, and technical design is an analog for workmanship. So that means is that your technical innovation is all about the idea and the choices that your team made to arrive at their solution. So like something that was really innovative was like the first car. So like the Model T, Ford has a famous quote that he says that if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. So that's the kind of idea we're getting out of innovation, is it's these super creative ideas that are technical that they bring to the challenge. Whereas technical design is more like workmanship. So this is how well implemented that idea is. So something like a Tesla is a really well-designed car, but it's not as innovative as the Model T because cars already existed. They're just doing it a little bit differently.
And again, this is the technical innovation and technical design are based on level. So an elementary level team, innovation looks different than a senior level team, right? It's what's brand new to them, not what's brand new in the world. So we're looking for what's brand new technically for an elementary level team or a middle level team or a senior level team. And that goes along with design as well. Design, like pristine design, looks much different for an elementary level team than it does for a senior level team.
Along those lines, one tip to like kind of get your brains moving when you're trying to decide like what's innovative and like trying to get like a solid definition for that is to just come up with like a bunch of things that are technical and then rate them from like least innovative to most innovative. So you have like a car and a bus and a refrigerator and all kinds of different things and put them on a scale from least innovative to most innovative. And once you've kind of got some ideas going, you can go on and like do the same idea for some possible solutions you guys could have. So you could have all the team members come up with like a couple of ways they think they could solve the challenge and then kind of rate them on like least innovative to most innovative, and then also kind of rank them on like feasibility. So like this would be easy to do, this would be really difficult to do, just so you guys can kind of calibrate yourselves.
Okay, and then the last piece we really wanted to point out about the Maze Traveler is section H4, and basically that's technical methods using less direct team member involvement may earn more points for technical innovation and technical design. And all that's saying is if your Maze Traveler operates using a human, it's going to get less technical points than if it operates without a human. So the farther you can get a team member from the Maze Traveler, the more technical it is. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, raise your hand, send in a question, send in a chat. Okay.
So let's give it like 5 seconds just so they.
Yeah, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to process what we said and think if you have any questions or anything thus far. Oh, I got a hand. I'm going to unmute you.
Just say it again. Just repeat it, please.
Okay.
Okay, so the part about technical methods using less direct team member involvement?
Yes.
So basically, it means that the less human involvement, the more technical something is. And so I'm just going to give you a couple examples. So if you've got a cart, right, and a human is pushing it, and that's the motor, is them pushing a wagon, that's less technical than if the wagon moves with a motor, or if the wagon can make decisions on its own.
And say if you have a remote controlled car, that's more technical than the kid in the car driving it. And
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so you can have fill the spectrum.
What was that?
I said you can keep telling more if you want. I just wanted to know I got it. Okay.
All right, perfect. Okay, great. So I think we're going to move on. Oh, that's the wrong way. Okay, I really need to figure this out, but I'm doing it. Okay, so the next piece here is navigating the maze, and this is section D of the challenge if you're following along. So one thing we wanted to point out was how a maze traveler should navigate the maze. So in D1, the second half of it mentions that the maze traveler needs to enter at the entry line, go through both event squares, and exit at the exit line. So I'm just going to go back here to our to our maze. So it has to enter at the entry line. Oh, you can't see. Can I draw? Hold on. Pen. So it has to enter at the entry line, go to both event squares in any order. So if they come in, they go to this square and then come back, that's fine too. And then it must exit. And so the important thing with this is that there is a subjective scoring element about the accuracy of the maze traveler's navigation. And in order to navigate, it needs to, in order to successfully navigate the maze, that's what they're saying it should do.
The subjective scoring element also takes into account if they like hit the walls of the maze and like knock them out of place. That lowers your score. Things like accidentally dipping out of the maze, because they're only like the walls are going to be 2x4s laid on their flat face or their biggest face. And so if there aren't 2x4s on the edges of the maze, so if you accidentally slip out of the maze, that's going to deduct from that subjective scoring element.
Yes. Something else, there's some okay, I hope I didn't confuse a ton of people there. I hope I'm okay. I hope everybody's still with me. Another really confusing language piece in this challenge is this idea of contact points. So they spend a lot of time talking about what contact points are and how many contact points you have to have in order to count as being somewhere. And we kind of want to take the fear out of the contact points language. Basically, think of the maze as a two-dimensional thing. A contact point means it's touching the floor. You want to add anything to that?
So because we've made it like we're trying to think of it as a 2D space, that way we can allow like bigger things that like kind of like could like slip out or something like that because they're like a V shape or something like that. We don't want to restrict on that. So by making it like 2D, we can definitively say, yes, this is in the maze, no, this is not in the maze, because it's not in the maze if part of it is touching outside the maze on the floor. So if it's just like hovering barely above the floor but not touching it, technically it is still in the maze if it's just got that one point inside the maze. But I would advise against things like that, because sometimes you do have stickler appraisers who are going to be looking really tightly, and if they can't see well, they're going to deduct you points. And it needs to be obvious from 20 feet away that you are inside the maze with that contact point, because that's about how far away the appraisers are going to be.
Are we clear on contact points? If we are not, shoot in a question or raise your hand. Not physically, I can't see you. Okay, so after another thing is after entering the entry line, the maze traveler can move in and out any way that it wishes. And one of the things I want to point out is there will not be an outside boundary of the maze. So the maze is going to be taped, but the outside boundaries are not going to be 2x4s. The only 2x4s are those bold lines on the maze. So again, I'm going to go back to our maze here. The outside of the maze has no boundary. You can go in and out as much as you want, but that might affect your subjective score of accuracy of the maze traveler's navigation. Okay. We're going to move on. If you have questions, throw them out there. Let's talk about events. So section E are the events. So far all we've covered is the maze traveler, which is part number 1, and maze traveling through the maze. And now we're going to talk about events. So there are 2 different events that have to be completed during the team's presentation. So one is the prop transformation and the other is the object removal. Both of these need to use technical methods. And we've talked a little bit about what technical methods are. Things like human involvement make that score go down. We want to see workmanship and or technical design and technical innovation, synonymous with workmanship and creativity. And then the 2 events cannot use the same physical item. So your prop transformation and your object removal cannot be the same thing. They cannot be the maze traveler, and they cannot be a team member. So your prop transformation cannot be a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's say you have like a transformer. The transformer can transform, but it can't be the thing that gets removed from the maze.
Cool. So let's talk a little more in depth about what these events look like. So your prop transformation, the important things we took away from that. 1, your prop transformation is team created. So your team will create and then bring this thing, whatever that prop is, to the tournament. We will not provide it for you. And then second, at least one floor contact point of the prop needs to be in the square when the prop transformation begins. So hopefully that makes sense. Do you want to add anything to that?
This is something you would draw attention to in your paperwork because the beginning of the prop transformation is team defined. So if, let's say, you have something that jumps up in the air and transforms and then comes back down, if you say the transformation starts when it just before it jumps, that counts. But if you say it transforms in the air, that doesn't count.
Yes. You will learn your paperwork is probably going to be key to this challenge. Point out anything you can if it's a little ambiguous so that we can understand kind of where you're coming from and what your team wants us to look for. The second event is the object removal, and some important pieces we pulled from that was in order for the object to be successfully removed, the entire thing must be outside of maze boundaries. So if you choose to remove your object by throwing it up in the air and it explodes and part of it lands inside the maze, then the entire object isn't outside of maze boundaries. The second piece is when the object removal begins, all of the object's floor contact points must be inside the event square. So you can't have your object partially outside of the event square, at least in terms of where it's touching the floor. Thoughts?
So this is another place where you want to be kind of space conscious, because if it has to be completely removed from the maze and it's bigger than what you have at the minimum space on that edge boundary of where the maze isn't, you need to be aware that like it has to fit in that space, or else you can't actually remove it from the maze.
And then in the corner here we have a little purple bubble that I spent probably too much time making, and it says tips. Have the teams become experts and teach each other. So one of the things that we found really helpful was like being on teams ourselves and then watching other teams perform. In order to teach your teams how to read a challenge, which is one of the fun things outside of DI, is having them become experts on their one part of the challenge. So if you have one team member that's in charge of the prop transformation and knows those rules inside and out, they can teach the rest of the team, and that can be your go-to expert, so that you as a team manager don't have to take on that role of, you know, bouncing in between interference, telling them what they can and can't do. And it gives the team members something that they can really be in charge of and be a leader on, which is neat too. Is that for everybody, or is it more of a quiet?
It's more of a quiet, but I'll announce it. So Natasha just asked if a team member could be inside of the prop during the transformation, and that kind of a thing is the kind of thing that we want to have you guys submit clarifications for. So we're going to cover clarifications in a little bit, but because Kayla and I aren't the arbiters on what is allowed and what isn't allowed, you want to get in writing if your solution is allowed from the International Challenge Masters if you do something interesting like having a prop team member inside of the prop during the transformation.
And then I see a hand raised. I know I'll mispronounce your name, so I'm going to unmute you, and then can you teach me how to say your name? Hi, I've unmuted you.
Hi, this is Pranav. Can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so the question is, from the entire object must be outside of the maze boundary. Within that, so whatever team is designing, so the whole thing has to be out, like, or could be this the part of the solutions, or they can define the object is small part of their whole solutions, which is part of their object removal process, and that they define as a smaller part of it, and which could be outside, taken outside.
So the object you remove is another one of those things that's defined in your team's paperwork. So your paperwork's going to ask you the question, what is the object being removed? You describe it, and then you probably also describe how it's being removed. And so long as one full contact point of whatever you've defined is inside of the square. So for example, if you had like a car, or car probably isn't a good example. So maybe like a you have a shirt in the maze, and you pop one of the buttons off and pull that outside of the maze, then that would count if you defined the button to be the object removed. But if you define the shirt as the object removed, then it doesn't count.
Got your point. Thank you.
Your question? Pranav, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
One thing I do also want to point out with that is everybody's going to want to be careful if they do something like define the button, because you have to have at least one floor contact point with the object removal, you have to have all contact points inside the square. So if it's a button, all floor contact points for that button, it needs to be touching the floor, is basically what I'm trying to get at. So you'll just want to be careful with that piece as well. Okay. I don't see any other hands. Do we have any other questions?
5 seconds. Just.
All right. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Awesome. This is your slide.
This is my favorite thing to talk about. So, I'm sure you've all noticed that this slide doesn't make any sense because it's got cupcakes and we've had mazes in the background of all of our things so far. And we've also changed the color pattern. We've changed everything. Instead of having little bubbles for tips, we've got a lightning bolt. It's all over the place, but it's kind of pretty. So this is like what integration is. Integration is how well this piece goes into your whole presentation. So while this slide in and of itself is pretty up to somebody who really likes cupcakes, it's not integrated well into the rest of the presentation. So we'll get low scores for integration.
Yes.
So integration is everything has to have a purpose. So if your story is about Martians and you have a pirate, unless the pirate's also a Martian, it's not very integrated or whatever, unless it needs to make sense. And it needs to it can't just be something you guys do because you thought it would be cool.
So one of the things I like to tell is a story of me when I was on a team. So in 3rd grade, I was on a DI team, and we were superheroes that were living like normal lives, but then we were superheroes. It was like Hannah Montana, sort of. And so we were doing that, and we wanted to make one of our team choice elements a song. And we'll talk about team choice elements here in a minute, but we wanted to write a song, and I insisted in 3rd grade that our song be about penguins. And we received very low integration scores because our entire story was about being superheroes and spies and had absolutely nothing to do with penguins, and yet our song was about penguins. So one of the tips we have is ask yourself, would the presentation be the same without it? So sometimes we see teams come in and there's somebody over in the corner, doing a dance, and then the rest of the story is going on at the other time. That's not going to receive very high integration, because if you pulled the dance out and just did the story, it would be the same thing. So if the dance means something to the story, or it's moving and you took it out and now there's nothing that transforms, then now it means something. So just ask yourself, would the presentation be the same if I took this out? If not, it's probably not very integrated. Okay. You want to talk about team choice elements also?
Yeah, sure. So team choice elements are a chance for your teams to do something that they want to do that might not fit naturally into the challenge. So, for example, one year, one of my teams, we had built this really big oil rig, and one of our team members had spent a lot of time going really in depth and making it super detailed. So we were able to get points for that because it was a team choice element instead of just having it be something that we had done. And so there are 3 big parts to how team choice elements are scored. There's the creativity and originality, quality and workmanship, and integration into the presentation. So we already covered integration, and creativity we've already said is kind of like technical innovation. So this is all about the choices that your team made to arrive at their solution. So this is all the ideas you've had, all the crazy thoughts that these kids come up with, and making those things manifest in something interesting for your presentation that allows you to kind of spice up your presentation, because it might not be as interesting if you only had the maze traveler and the 2 props. So this is where you get rewarded for if you have like a backdrop or some really gorgeous set pieces or some awesome costumes or like a really interesting song that goes into your performance. And so then we also go into quality and workmanship on this topic. So what I like to say with quality and workmanship is it's mastery of that whatever skill that you're trying to show off. So if you've painted a backdrop, something that's going to score high on quality and workmanship would be showing that you have mastered the idea of painting for somebody in your team level. Any thoughts on?
The only thing I want to say, your team choice element can be absolutely anything that happens during your presentation. So if it shows up in that 7 minutes that the team is presenting, it can be a team choice element. The only thing that it can't be is something else that's already scored. So it needs to be a standalone object or a standalone, it doesn't have to be an object, thing, anything, but it has to be standalone. It has to be able to be scored on these things by itself. So something you can't pick as a team choice element would be your maze traveler, because we're already scoring it for things very similar to creativity and originality, quality and workmanship, and then the integration into the presentation is scored in the story section. So if you did show up to tournament with a maze traveler and said, that's our team choice element, we would highly encourage your team to change it because it's already being scored, and they would probably get zeros in some sections or receive very, very low scores. Mm-hmm. So be sure that when you're picking those team choice elements that they aren't scored somewhere else. And if you aren't sure,
you can email one of us. We probably would be, that's probably in the realm of questions we would be able to answer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And another thing you can do, it's technically in the rules, but I want to kind of advise against it, is that your maze traveler is only scored for its technical aspects. So if you have it like dolled up all pretty, technically you could make that a team choice element, but that ends up kind of splitting the scores, and it's very hard for appraisers to like distinguish those two ideas. So while it is possible and things like that are technically allowed, it's very difficult on the appraiser end, so we advise against that kind of thing just to make it easier on the people who are judging.
The more standalone your object can be, the better off you are. I know I had a team a couple years ago that I really struggled with because they chose part of the challenge was something about having something that moved you across some lines. And so we had a team that really struggled because they picked one of their team choice elements that had to do with the thing that they were using to move across the lines, and it was really hard for my appraisers to determine what sections to score where. So yeah, I think that's all we have to say. That's the wrong way. I'm gonna get this.
Yes.
Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about scoring. So one thing that's really important in DI is understanding that 50% of the points means your team did really well. That means that they solved the challenge. It's the equivalent of getting a good grade on a test. They did a good job if they got 50% of the points. So
this means you did everything you're supposed to do. So everything, you've solved the challenge in the expected solution. So that would be like, when we're like trying to calibrate ourselves as appraisers, we think of like, okay, what do I expect a team of this level to do? And if they do that, that's about a 15.
So I'm going to show you part of our, so I just pulled one section of the scoring. You can also see this in your team, what is this called? A challenge guide. So here's the maze traveler, and on the side we can see that the maze traveler, this number 2, the accuracy of the maze traveler's navigation. This is a subjective score, so the appraisers will pick how accurate they think your team had the maze traveler navigate, and so it's up to 30 points. So that 30 points is going to be distributed differently for an elementary level team compared to a middle level team compared to a high school level team. Or, yeah, a senior level team, yes. So if they're getting 15 points on that, that means they met the challenge and they did exactly what was expected of them. If they get more than that, that means they were rocking and they killed it. And if they get less than that, that means that it just wasn't what the appraisers expected or thought. And a lot of the time there could be a lot of nuance within that. So sometimes the solutions can look very similar, but there's one teeny thing that made it different. So sometimes you'll fall just a little bit below. So just recognize that roughly 15, so 12 to like 17, 18-ish is pretty standard for that age range. And then I also want to point out back on this slide, ask your teams to sit down and talk with themselves and go, what's getting the most points? So sometimes teams get really stuck on doing whatever it is they want to work on, and you feel really nervous as a team manager because you recognize the tournament is coming up and you don't have done what you think you should have done. And sometimes sitting the teams down and having them discuss what's getting the most points, like where should we spend our time and invest our time and work the hardest. And a lot of the time that can be answered with the question, what's getting the most points? Okay. Do you want to talk about clarifications a little bit?
Sure. So as we mentioned earlier, a clarification is a chance for your team to ask the International Challenge Masters, or the guys who are in charge of the whole shebang, whether or not what you're doing fits within the rules. So these guys are the judges of every solution that comes their way. And so by asking them, if you have a clarification that says what you're doing is legit, what you're doing is absolutely legit. So as appraisers, we get a list of like a summary of like the general questions that have been asked, but we want you guys to have like in your paperwork when you come to the challenge any private clarifications you submitted.
So I want to talk a little bit about clarifications. There are two different types, right? So Justin just mentioned private clarifications, but there are also published clarifications. So published happens when there is an error or something that doesn't make sense in the rules of the road or in the challenge. So what happens is a bunch of people ask the same question and the International Challenge Masters go, you know what? We should clarify that for everyone. And that's when you get a published clarification. Mm-hmm. And then the other type of clarification is a private clarification. This is a team clarification. And what this means, you as a team manager and your team can sit down and submit a clarification. And sometimes it kind of reveals what your team is thinking for a solution. And you don't want the entire world to know what your solution is. And that's why these are private. So you submit them, and the team, the International Challenge Masters, can respond to them and give you your own private answer that no one else sees except the Regional Challenge Masters, the Affiliate Challenge Masters, so Justin and myself, and the International Challenge Masters. So it's nice because it keeps it secretive. You can keep it quiet, but it makes sure to clarify the rules for you. So if you bring it to challenge, that's the rule that we are going to appraise with, rather than how we would interpret it ourselves, which is why it's so important that you ask these, because it's making the rules very clear for you.
And an important note that's on the slide, the deadline to submit them is February 15th. So just try to get them in before then, because if you have a question that isn't in and you ask one of us after the deadline, we can't answer it for you because we don't have the authority.
And every team gets 10 of these, and they're awesome. Most teams don't use all 10.
I've never seen a team use 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. The most I've ever seen is like 7. Like it's very difficult not to get all your questions answered.
So so this is what the clarifications website looks like. So you go to the clarifications, and then in the corner here, you'll see it says Maze Craze. And so you click on that, and then it'll take you to this page, and here's the link up top for you. And basically it's just saying, so we only have one published clarification as of right now. So there's one that's public, and I was looking through them today, and we have about 80 private clarifications right now, a ton. And so what this clarification is saying is that the rules of the road is being more clear on what do you price. So a lot of the teams are considering building things like robots for their maze travelers, but using computers is super expensive. But those things aren't included in the budget, and they just want to make sure that's very clear so that teams that want to use those things have the ability to.
This is also talking about like extensions. So a common question that was asked was what to price on a Lego Mindstorm. So sensors are priced, Lego parts, sensors are not priced, Legos are priced. A good rule of thumb is if it has a circuit board, it's not supposed to be priced. But another thing I would do is just shoot a clarification with a big list of all your stuff and be like, here are all the technical components we're using. Which of these are exempt? Which of these aren't exempt? Or anything that you're like hazy about, because like an Arduino is absolutely in the rules of the road. Like you are allowed to use this without pricing it, but maybe like some extension you get for it you're a little uncomfortable with. So if you're uncomfortable about it, just shoot a clarification in.
Okay. And then we're going to talk a little bit about logistics. So the rules of the road is your best friend. Probably, I mean, almost more so than the challenge itself, because it tells you so many things that are okay and not okay, and how do you make sure your challenge works, and all sorts of things like that. So first, make sure that it fits through a standard door. It is tragic to see teams come in with a super, super cool thing that they built and spent so much time on, and then it doesn't fit in the room. Please do not be that team. That would make me cry. It's tragic, and we've seen it happen.
Also, in this same vein, be aware of setup time. You probably, if it fits through a standard door, but it takes you 3 hours to set it up, that probably isn't going to fly. So be able to get it in and out quickly.
Second, no explosives. Please do not bring fireworks or laser pointers or things that explode.
There's a big list of things that aren't allowed in the rules of the road, and it's just most of them are pretty obvious, but it's just we need to have it in writing. Like no combustion engines inside.
The third thing that we've struggled with in years past is if you make a mess, be prepared to clean it up, i.e. bring a vacuum or a broom. I have seen many teams that really, really love confetti, and confetti's cool, I agree. But we have teams going on every 20 minutes. So if it takes you 20 minutes to clean it up, that's going to be a problem. So make sure to bring a vacuum or a broom if your team plans on using something like confetti. Parents are allowed to help clean up. Team managers are allowed to help clean up after the presentation. So that shouldn't be something you're concerned about.
In the same space, like liquids, be very, very cautious with liquids, because we've had teams like spill cooking oil on the stage, and we had to shut down for like an hour while we got it cleaned up. So that kind of a thing, if you are using it, ask your RCM about it, and like be sure to have a plan for cleaning up and make sure that you don't need to use that plan.
Yeah. If you're going to bring cooking oil because your team's making a lava volcano, which is super cool, I get it, I want to see it too, bring it in a cookie pan so that if it spills in the cookie pan. Like, just please be prepared. And then be wary of scratches. So typically the technical challenge is housed in a gym, and sometimes gyms get brand new gym floors and are very, very picky about what we're allowed to do on those floors. We see a lot of ball bearings, and those tend to destroy the floors. So just think about what your team is building, and more or less, if you won't let them run it on hardwoods at home, we're probably not going to let them do it at tournament.
And I mean, finally, shoes have to have soles. So I don't know what kind of shoes don't have soles.
I don't know.
I don't own any shoes without
Wear
soles.
shoes at tournament.
Yes, shoes. Are sandals allowed?
Yeah, they don't have to be closed-toed shoes anymore.
Not closed-toed shoes, but same idea. Just make sure your feet are protected.
All right, I see a question. I'm gonna. Kamla?
Yes, I was just wondering about the floor. So the maze itself will just be the wood on the gym floor?
The maze will be, there's going to be the gym floor, and then tape that's going to be the grid, and then pieces of 2x4 that are going to be the walls.
So it won't really touch the floor, it'll touch the grid.
It'll touch the floor, which, so you've got like taped lines, but like the floor is the floor.
Like we're just gonna.
I got it. Okay, it's not going to be like a piece of cardboard or something. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. Oh, that's the wrong direction again. Oh my goodness, I'm incapable. Alrighty, so another thing, rules of the road. How do you complete your expense report and your budget? That's in there. So that's really helpful, because if you're not sure if something counts, or you get something at a yard sale and you're like, well, shoot, I bought this drill at a yard sale and it only cost me $6, But if I buy it new, it would have cost me 70. What do we do? That's going to answer those questions. There's also a thing about what doesn't count for cost. So there are items that are considered trash items, and that's helpful. And then there's also information on interference rules. So if you're ever not sure if you as a team manager are, if you're kind of hanging out on that line and you want to make sure that you're not interfering, there's a lot of information on there too that'll help you recognize when you're interfering and when you're not, so that we don't have that issue. Yeah, and I think that's really it. I know we had some questions too. Usually we talk a little bit about just different solutions. I feel like a lot of people sign up for this challenge and think that their teams have to build a robot, and you don't. You absolutely do not have to. So if we think of different, I mean, your maze traveler has to be built with technical elements, but I mean, just about anything could be a technical element. I mean, a bicycle would solve the challenge. You could get a kid on a skateboard, and that would solve the challenge.
I mean, there are minimum levels for these things, but I mean, you just have to keep in mind that the appraisers do have some expectation for what it will be, and just because a kid on a skateboard does solve the challenge doesn't mean that's the highest scoring possibility.
And that's not going to score very high for technical innovation or technical design at all.
But it's just to make it a little bit less scary. So you can think in that space without jumping immediately to robots. And you can encourage your kids, because you can do some incredibly, incredibly technical ideas that are entirely mechanical and don't use anything electronic. And just think there was a GIF going around on the internet of a man who had made a crane using hydraulics using IV cord, and it's incredible. And that kind of a thing that's perfectly mechanical and hands-on, but that would score incredibly high for technical design and technical innovation.
Depending on your appraiser's subjective mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are plenty of solutions, and a kid can power the vehicle as well. So although the technical innovation and technical design are important, you can still score points using a human-powered vehicle, and that's completely appropriate depending on the level your team is at as well. So that's really all that we have for you. Please feel free to ask questions. We can unmute and have a discussion if you want, or you can ask each other questions since you're team managers and we're not. We can really do whatever.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, feel free to log off if you want, or raise your hand, we'll unmute you, we can chat, or we're down to talk.
Cool.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Oh, do you want to show them what Arduinos look like and stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is an Arduino. It's a little circuit board, and this is a very nice resource for a way to get into robotics that isn't that difficult. So basically the idea is you've got a computer chip that you can write computer code for, and it'll run motors and things like that. And so it's
Is this the computer chip?
that's the computer chip.
So that's the computer chip right there.
Yeah, so you can run all kinds of different things. I've seen some really incredible projects for these, people powering their gardens with them and things like that. And so it's just it's pretty easy to access. I mean, we've taught third graders this kind of material before, and some of the other things I've volunteered with. So it's really accessible, and it's a good place to start if you haven't explored. Just to reiterate, it's called an Arduino. Spelling Arduino.
And then we have a question, so I'm going to unmute you. Yeah, Pranav?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. So the maze will be all with the taped lines and everywhere. So the X marks also with the taped marked in. Correct?
Yes, and the arrows will be taped on the floor where they have to enter and where they have to exit.
And if I like we read as a the challenge as a team together, and the way it says that like team members at any given time during the presentations can be inside the maze or they can be outside the maze. And if they need to kind of make something creative apart from what they have within that transformation and event, like both events in a way, they can also have uh, liberty to place things inside the maze. Is that right? Not on the
Absolutely.
wall, but inside the maze.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a part of the space conscientiousness we were talking about, and how like you need to have those discussions because this maze is changing. You've got this one prop. Where are we going to place this prop so it's not anywhere that we need to have access to?
And you can move things throughout as well. So you are absolutely allowed to set a wall somewhere. Maybe you create a prop and it would block where the maze traveler goes, but then you move it before the maze traveler gets there.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely appropriate too. And if you have more than the 20 by 20 space, which is highly likely because most of the time we're in a gym, you can absolutely use whatever space is there available to you. So you are not limited to that 20 by 20 space if you have more space than that.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Do you have anything else cool in that box?
Nothing.
Do you have a Raspberry Pi?
I do. It's in the other room, but I can grab it.
Well, you don't have to if you want.
I think the Arduinos are way cooler.
All right, cool.
Yeah, so I mean, if there are no other questions, we'll give it like one more minute and then
we'll just hang out until you all log off. So if you have questions and stuff, we are happy to help.
I think we've got another
one more question. As we talked about Arduino and Raspberry Pi, so there are a lot of attachment and things comes with those things. I know you a little bit touched on that, asking about the cost and other stuff, because most of those are kind of reusable. And I see the rules of road is saying like the things you are using in the original form and you are not changing the form, as far as and it's electronics, you can reuse somewhere else as far as that doesn't consider as a cost. That's my interpretation.
I think like a motor shield, if that's like kind of what you're getting at, where like the one that's meant to drive motors, I would think that would be exempt. Again, it's because it's not explicitly in the rules of the road. I would suggest a clarification. But at my tournament, if you had it exempt, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. That just makes sense to be exempt.
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. What else? I also think it's important to know that when you're building out your budget, if something has been used before or bought for some other purpose, you can give it a fair yard sale or garage sale price.
We're not sticklers about this kind of a thing. It's mostly just to keep you honest. So like if you come in with what's clearly $1,000 worth of lumber, we'll call you on it. But like if I think it's like the lumber you have is worth $105 and you put it as $100, like it's not a big deal.
But that's a really good way that your team may be able to repurpose some things that may have otherwise felt outside of the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop recording now.